hub starts right here in the Seattle-Tacoma area of Washington. They're then trafficked down the I-90 corridor all the way across to the city of Spokane, Washington, where another group of the Aryan family known as the Aryan Knights of Idaho take over the operations. They then use human mules from the city of Coeur d'Alene to drive the drugs down Highway 95 and into Moscow, Idaho to their distributor. They then distribute the drugs to the local dealers, and then the dealers peddle the drugs to the youth at the colleges in Moscow and Ulm.
In my last couple presentations, I made the case for why I support Pavarotti's theory that the confidential informant in the investigation of the drug trafficking trio, the Fetty Bros, is in fact Kara Kernodle, which is not a speculation I make lightly. In fact, it's a notion I've spent many hours vetting and attempting to debunk through court records and public information. But the more I uncovered, the stronger this theory got. And I challenge anyone, especially content creators, who think this notion is far-fetched, to present receipts to the contrary before attacking the likelihood of this theory based on your own subjective opinion. It's clear that this theory in particular triggers some people, and I'm all for disagreements and debate, but you gotta produce facts if you want to discredit this information. So I want to be clear. Yes, some of these connections remain speculative, but they come from an informed perspective and are based on factual research, not opinions, not feelings. This case is a complex web that is slowly being untangled through extensive, dedicated, and collaborative research, and I'm honored to be a part of that. Speaking of, this video is a continuation of my own presentation of Pavarotti's information, and I will also feature the work of a couple other awesome content creators that I have learned information from. I will, of course, give proper credit where it's due. So I encourage you to go check out those channels and support those creators who are really doing the heavy lifting here. So with all that said, let's deep dive into some of these new relevant connections and their alleged affiliation to the King Road residents. Starting with an individual known as Tyson Farley, who has been identified in the media as a local meth trafficker. He is 46 years old and seems to have lived in Moscow, Idaho his entire life. And one of the main reasons folks are linking his name to these murders, besides the drug connection, comes from the Linda Lane surveillance video, where the name Farley is very clearly uttered not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. And credit for this discovery goes to the wonderful Bubbly Waters, who I would say is the undisputed expert of the Linda Lane security footage. I highly doubt anyone else has spent more time listening and watching this footage, so shout out to Bubbly Waters. This snippet of footage is from 1:32 a.m., and I'll go ahead and play that for you. Continuing on with some connections of Farley to the King Road residents, this next piece of information comes from my girl, Veritas Equitas, who identified the fact that Farley works, or I would say worked, for Germer Construction, according to Facebook. This is the same company that was hired by Scott Green and the university to demolish the King Road house. Veritas writes that the premature demolition of the IDAHO4 crime scene was nothing short of suspicious. U of I President Scott Green made the decision to demolish and later bury the 1122 King Road crime scene, despite pleas from the Gonsalves and Kernodle families to leave it standing until a trial has commenced. He was so graciously gifted the house from Dan Esty of 1122 King LLC, who removed himself as the agent from the LLC within just a month of the atrocities on November 13th. Veritas produced these screenshots showing Larry Germer, the CEO of Germer Construction, associated with Tyson Farley on Facebook, and also pictured with Jason Eck, the U of I football coach. Once again, it seems that everyone associated with the university is in bed together with the common goal of covering up this atrocity. Tanya Rhodes is a longtime associate of Tyson Farley. She is 54 years old and is from Moscow, Idaho. According to Facebook, they have been in a relationship since October of 2000. So Farley and Rhodes are longtime associates, if not lovers. Now enter 51-year-old Michael Burrows, an individual with a very extensive criminal history who has spent a long time in the penitentiary. He was arrested on felony drug trafficking charges with Tanya Rhodes in March of 2024, and he owns property in Coeur d'Alene and Julietta, Idaho. Julietta is south of Coeur d'Alene, north of Moscow, and that's where the two were arrested in March of 2024. The case began when a probation officer and a Latah County Sheriff's deputy conducted a residence check on the two at their apparently shared home on Main Street in Julietta. According to court documents, authorities allegedly found 1.5 pounds of meth along with cocaine, pills, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia. They were arrested on a $100,000 bond, and Michael Burrows was able to post this as a property bond.
Map right here. We still got the victims. What is their connection to TF and TR? Well, TF and TR connected to MB, originally known as M. Ketchka. Now, what is his connection up here to the families in Coeur d'Alene? Now, we know that he grew up in Coeur d'Alene. People who live in Coeur d'Alene probably know this guy because he seems to be pretty famous. And is he a good candidate for being a ranking member of the Aryan Knights? Because, I mean, let's face it, these guys, they come up with pounds and pounds. They don't seem like, they're affluent individuals to have tens of thousands of dollars worth of narcotics. So that would assume that they have that connection coming from Seattle and Spokane. So I would assume that based on his violent history and the time spent in the penitentiary and the fact that he's got pounds and pounds of narcotics, I'm going to say he's the Aryan Knight connection once you get to Coeur d'Alene, because he owns a house there and he owns a house down in Julietta. Not bad for a career criminal.
So just to recap, we have these three individuals who are connected to each other, Burrows and Rhodes as co-defendants in a actively pending case, and Rhodes and Farley, who are longtime associates and lovers, who were also arrested together, but we'll get to that in a minute. But what's the connection to King Road? And this was brilliantly uncovered by Pavarotti, once again, the channel Jay Embry. And that is the fact that Burrows and Maddie's stepmom, Corey Hatrock, were neighbors for 17 years. I was able to confirm that Corey Hatrock lived at this address on East Boyd Avenue in Coeur d'Alene from 1998 until 2019, according to public records. This address is several hundred feet, a 3-minute walk or a 1-minute drive to the house on North 16th Street that Michael Burrows has owned since 2002. So you're not going to tell me that these two who lived a couple blocks apart and were both into methamphetamine didn't know each other despite living a couple hundred feet apart for 17 years. I made this visual to show you the sort of chain of command when it comes to these drug trafficking operations. As I've said before, the cartels work with gangs to distribute these drugs, and it's a very organized system with the cartels at the top, the main two being the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. As we've covered with the Fetty Bros, who I would classify as importers, these are people who go directly to the source in Mexico or Arizona and are involved in that process of actually importing the drugs. I place the Aryan family here as well because of their associates in Arizona, but they are actually a prison gang in Washington with about 200 members, and Jesse James Bailey has been identified as the leader. As for the distributors, I put the three individuals we talked about before, Farley, Rhodes, and Burrows, as distributors because of the amount of drugs they were caught with each time they were arrested. And we're talking pounds here, not 28 grams like Kara and Corey were caught with. I also placed the Aryan Knights here. The Aryan Knights are a prison gang that primarily operate in Idaho. And while they are a separate gang from the Aryan family, they do work together to distribute drugs, but the Aryan Knights really take over when it comes to Idaho. And beneath the distributors, I have the dealers and drug mules. These are lower level dealers with criminal records associated with possession, usually under 28 grams. Of course, we have Emma and Demetrius, who are the known dealers in Moscow and Pullman. And then below them, of course, we have the users, who are UI and WSU students, especially Greek Life members. And these are the people who are buying the drugs directly from the dealers. And you can see how it moves down the chain. So I hope you find that helpful in sort of visualizing how this operation runs. So those are the connections in a nutshell. Now I want to kind of place these events and individuals into a timeline leading up to the massacre. August 31st, 2022, we have the alleged distributors Farley and Rhodes arrested in Moscow with a pound of meth. And once again, very serious trafficking and possession charges. Once again, Idaho does not play when it comes to the sentencing statutes on these charges. Farley was given a $75,000 bond. About a week after their arrest, both Kernodle and Hat Rock are pleading guilty in the time period of September 7th through September 13th. And once again, Farley and Rhodes are connected to Miss Corey Hat Rock through at least what we can identify is Michael Burrows, as they were neighbors for 17 years. But here's where things get interesting. Tyson Farley was granted furlough by Judge Megan Marshall, who is the original judge in the Koberger case. Apparently, Farley was released on furlough so he could visit a family member who was deathly ill, but he never returned to jail and missed his next few status conferences. So Megan Marshall releases Farley on his own recognizance on September 23rd of 2022. Surprise, surprise, he failed to return to jail, and on October 5th, a warrant for his arrest was issued. So Tyson Farley is out running the streets thanks to Judge Megan Marshall. Heading into November of 2022, as we've established, the Fetty Bros were sentenced in Spokane to decades in federal prison on November 2nd. A few days later is Corey Hat Rock's sentencing, and once again, she did accept a plea agreement. Less than a week later, of course, is the tragic King Road massacre on November 13th. On November 19th, Kara Kernodle caught 2 more felony possession charges, and she was arrested in Coeur d'Alene on November 21st, just 8 days after her daughter's murder. But we do know that Kara was in Spokane at the time of the murders from an interview she did with Crime Sleuthin', and I'll insert that right here.
I mean, I don't know if he's kept with that or not. I don't speak to him much, but he was the one that told me about it. He came and found me in Spokane, and before it hit the news and everything, and that's what he told me personally, was that he spoke with her, and that they were at the party, and that there was that altercation, and she was fine. She was at home. She was fine.
2 days after Kara's arrest, Tyson Farley is arrested in Spokane on November 23rd, based on that bench warrant out of Latah County. He was extradited on December 1st.
That with his charges transferred back to Latah County, something strange is going to start happening with TF. Because this is a case that if he contested it, should have carried on for a long period of time. And you would think he would have to contest it, because if he was convicted on trafficking like he's charged with, he would get a minimum 10 years in prison, possibly life. That is the statute by the legislature in Idaho. So what happened from December 2nd until December 19th? Well, we know that a lot of things all of a sudden heated up in the investigation of Brian Koberger. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're filing warrants for DoorDash. They're filing warrants for Amazon. They go to Brent Kopacka and they unalive him. And then all of a sudden, Brian Kohberger's name is injected into the investigation, and then a reverse investigation into him in every possible way starts.
So now it's mid-December. Tyson Farley is in Latah County custody, possibly talking to prosecutors about what he knows went down on King Road on the night of November 13th. And you'll see why in a minute this is quite plausible. On December 20th of 2022, Tyson Farley pleads guilty to those trafficking charges. It's also interesting to note that Tyson Farley's public defender was none other than Kathy Mabbitt, the county coroner who responded to the King Road residents and notably stated that toxicology will not be relevant in this case. 3 months after Farley changes his plea, on March 6th of 2023, Judge releases him from custody and sentences him to 3 years of felony probation, dismissing counts 1 and 3 against him. He would go on to violate his probation, but the fact that he was just given probation for these serious charges is a huge red flag and suggests that he traded some important information to secure this plea deal. Moreover, the way the prosecution has conducted itself in the courtroom suggests that an informant put them onto Kohberger. This is why they failed to identify what put them onto Kohberger's trail in the first place. Was it the Elantra? Was it the DNA? I assert no. It was another criminal who was locked up in custody during the time of the investigation and may have actually been involved in the murders at the scene of the crime as the Linda Lane footage places him. Now, I actually do believe that Kohberger and Kopacka together were lured to the King Road neighborhood, likely with the prospect of purchasing drugs. But in my opinion, the perpetrators set them up as intended patsies. It's likely they were in contact with Emma Bailey, who, yes, set them up to be framed for this crime. Tyson Farley does his job by pointing investigators in the direction of Kohberger, and he also scores a pretty sweet plea deal out of it. This is supported by a January 2023 filing by the state that says, quote, "To the extent that information exists regarding an informant who is not going to be produced as a witness, including recordings or written statements of an informant or that identity of an informant, such information is not subject to disclosure, and the state asserts informant privilege under ICR 16G2 and prays for appropriate protective orders pursuant to ICR 16.1 as necessary." Translated to, yeah, we did use an informant to lead us to the defendant, but we're not going to produce that informant as a witness, so it's none of the defense's business as to the identity of that informant. Now, if the informant is a career criminal who had quite a bit to gain from this disclosure and may have even been at the scene of the crime as captured in the Linda Lane footage, of course they won't put him on the witness stand. As for those stated reasons, he is not credible, and Ann Taylor would rip him to shreds. So when you really step back and look at the players involved, from Megan Marshall being the reason that Farley was free during the murders as she let him out on furlough, and she's also the judge that issued the non-dissemination order, which has led to a lot of secrecy and skepticism about the investigation and the prosecution of the defendant. The fact that this plea deal was secured by John Judge with the participation of his attorney, the coroner, Kathy Mabbitt, you can really start to see how a frame job of this magnitude can actually happen when you have powerful people in a small town with aligned interests and are willing to go to extreme lengths to cover up the rampant drug trafficking in Moscow. From the corrupt cops to the university to, yes, even the courtroom officials. They are all complicit in allowing these drug trafficking operations to become entrenched in their community, preying on the vulnerable and leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. But I want to know what you think about these connections, the timeline of events leading up to the murders, and the investigation that led them straight to Bryan Kohberger. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.